If the most powerful alpha vampire in the world is kneeling in the rain, then someone has already broken the one thing he believed could never be taken from him. The rain fell without mercy, turning the gravel path into ribbons of silver beneath the pale moonlight. Damien Blackthorne remained on one knee outside a modest white farmhouse at the edge of Willow Creek, his black coat soaked through, his silver hair plastered against skin so pale it seemed carved from marble. 3 months earlier, every vampire elder across North America had bowed when he entered a room. Tonight, there was no throne beneath him, no royal court, no guards waiting for his command. There was only silence, the steady rhythm of rain striking the porch roof, and a warm light glowing behind the small kitchen window where Emily Carter refused to look at him. The alpha who had ruled for more than 5 centuries slowly lifted his eyes toward the front door, his crimson gaze carrying none of the cold certainty that once terrified kingdoms. It carried hope, fragile and unfamiliar. The door creaked open just enough for Emily to step outside. She wore a simple cream-colored sweater, faded blue jeans, and worn work boots still dusted with flour from the bakery where she had spent the afternoon. Her brown hair rested loosely over one shoulder, and the porch light softened the exhaustion beneath her blue-gray eyes. She looked healthier than she had inside Blackthorne Manor, where every day had demanded another sacrifice, yet something in her expression had become distant, protected. Damien's voice was almost lost beneath the rain. "Tell me what it will take for you to love me again." Emily stared at him for a long moment. Once, hearing those words would have felt impossible. Once, she had believed nothing in the world mattered more than earning a single smile from the alpha vampire who barely acknowledged her existence. Now, she felt only the quiet ache left behind after accepting that some dreams had to die before a person could truly live. She folded her arms against the evening chill and answered with a calmness that hurt him far more than anger ever could. "You're asking the wrong question." Damien lowered his head, unable to argue. Every mile he had traveled to reach this porch suddenly felt insignificant beside the distance growing between their hearts. Emily gently rested one hand against the edge of the door. "Love isn't something you beg for after you've thrown it away." Her words were soft, almost kind, yet each one settled into the silence with undeniable weight. Before Damien could answer, she stepped back inside. The door closed. The warm light disappeared behind the curtain. He remained motionless beneath the rain, listening to the quiet life continuing without him inside that little farmhouse. For the first time in 500 years, the strongest alpha vampire in existence realized there was a battle no ancient power, no royal bloodline, and no supernatural gift could ever win by force. It could only be earned. 3 months earlier, everything had been different. 3 months earlier, Emily Carter was nothing more than a quiet maid working in Blackthorne Manor, and Damien Blackthorne still believed destiny could be rejected without consequence. 3 months earlier, Blackthorne Manor stood above the cliffs like a fortress carved from midnight stone, its towering windows glowing softly against the winter sky. Emily Carter arrived every morning before sunrise, long before the grand halls filled with nobles, advisors, and servants rushing to prepare for another day beneath the watchful eyes of the alpha vampire. She always entered through the eastern service gate carrying a canvas bag that held nothing more than her lunch, a worn notebook, and the small silver locket her late mother had left behind. Most servants hurried through their work hoping to avoid attention, but Emily moved through the castle with quiet purpose, greeting everyone with the same gentle smile whether they were cooks, stable hands, or gardeners. She believed kindness cost nothing, even inside a place where almost everything else carried a price. Few people noticed her, and she preferred it that way. The eastern wing remained the quietest part of the enormous estate because it was reserved for Noah, the young vampire boy who rarely left his private library. Many servants feared him simply because they did not understand him. Others whispered that he had not spoken a single word since birth and that strange things happened whenever he became frightened. Emily ignored every rumor. Every afternoon after finishing her assigned duties, she spent 30 minutes reading storybooks with Noah, patiently using simple hand signs she had learned years earlier while volunteering at a community center. Noah never answered aloud, but his bright amber eyes always softened whenever she entered the room carrying fresh cookies from the kitchen. On one cold December afternoon, snow drifted gently across the castle gardens while Emily carefully repaired the sleeve of Noah's favorite sweater beside the library fireplace. The young boy sat cross-legged on the rug assembling a wooden puzzle, completely absorbed until a heavy door opened somewhere behind them. Neither of them looked up. Emily continued sewing another loose stitch before quietly signing, "Please keep your voice down. He finally feels safe today." The room became perfectly still. Noah's eyes widened first. He quickly stood and lowered his head with surprising respect. Only then did Emily realize someone had entered. She turned slowly and found herself looking directly into the calm silver eyes of Damien Blackthorne. Every story she had ever heard about the alpha vampire suddenly echoed through her mind. Ancient. Unmatched. Untouchable. Yet instead of panic, embarrassment colored her face because she had unknowingly given the ruler of the entire territory an ordinary request. "I am sorry, Your Majesty," she said softly. "I did not realize you were there." Damien studied her without answering. Most people froze the moment they saw him. Others immediately apologized for things they had not even done. Emily had apologized only because she worried Noah might become anxious. The difference intrigued him more than he cared to admit. His gaze shifted toward the child, who had already relaxed again beside Emily. Noah even reached for her hand without hesitation, something he almost never did around strangers. Damien had spent decades trying to earn that level of trust from the boy. This quiet young maid had done it simply by showing up every day with patience instead of expectations. As Emily returned to repairing the sweater, she never noticed that Damien remained standing in the doorway several moments longer than necessary. For reasons he could not explain, the cold silence that had followed him for centuries felt just a little less absolute whenever she was near. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm neither of them acknowledged. Emily continued her work as though nothing had changed, sweeping endless hallways, arranging fresh flowers throughout the manor, and making certain Noah always had a warm breakfast waiting before the winter sun climbed above the cliffs. Damien, however, found himself changing habits that had remained untouched for centuries. His morning inspections suddenly included the eastern wing. His evening walks somehow ended near the library. He told himself he was checking security, reviewing staff performance, or ensuring Noah was comfortable, yet every path seemed to lead him back to the same quiet young woman who never appeared interested in impressing anyone. Emily treated him with respect, but never with fear. She bowed when appropriate, answered every question honestly, and then returned to whatever task needed finishing. There were no attempts to gain favor, no carefully chosen compliments, no hidden requests. It was a kind of honesty Damien had almost forgotten existed. One snowy afternoon, while Emily carried a basket of clean blankets toward Noah's room, a sudden gust of icy wind pushed open one of the manor's tall balcony doors. A decorative silver lantern resting on the stone railing shifted unexpectedly. Before anyone nearby could react, it slipped toward the edge. Emily set the basket down without thinking and hurried forward. At that exact moment Damien stepped onto the balcony from the opposite hallway. He reached for the lantern at the same instant Emily did. Their hands met around the cold silver handle. Time seemed to hesitate. A faint warmth spread through Damien's fingertips, unlike anything he had experienced in more than 500 years. The air itself grew strangely still. Tiny snowflakes drifting between them appeared to shimmer in the pale afternoon light. Emily immediately pulled her hand away, startled by the unexpected sensation that rushed through her chest. It was not painful. It simply felt familiar, as though she had remembered a song she had never learned. Damien looked down before anyone else could notice. Hidden beneath the sleeve of his black coat, a delicate silver mark briefly appeared across his wrist, glowing like moonlight reflected on calm water. His expression remained perfectly controlled, but his heartbeat echoed once inside his chest with impossible strength. The ancient mark vanished almost as quickly as it had appeared. Emily noticed none of it. She simply smiled with quiet relief after setting the lantern safely back in place. "I am glad we caught it before it broke," she said softly. "It looks very old." Damien answered after a long silence. "It is older than this house." She nodded politely, unaware that his attention had never left her face. From the far end of the balcony, another pair of eyes had witnessed everything. Victoria Ashford stood behind a marble column, hidden by the falling snow. Her elegant smile never changed, yet something cold settled behind her eyes. She recognized the symbol that had flashed across Damien's wrist. Every noble vampire knew the ancient stories. The moon mark appeared only once in a lifetime, and only when destiny bound two souls together. Victoria slowly closed the book she had been carrying and walked away without making a sound. Before sunset, she had already begun planning how to convince the Alpha that destiny itself could be deceived. Inside the quiet eastern wing, Emily returned to folding blankets beside Noah, never realizing that a single accidental touch had awakened forces far older than either of them could possibly understand. That evening, the first real snow of the season settled over Blackthorn Manor, covering the gardens in a blanket of white so untouched that every path seemed to disappear beneath the moonlight. Emily finished placing fresh logs beside the fireplaces before making her usual trip to Noah's library with a tray of warm cinnamon tea and homemade bread. She found the young boy sitting quietly beside the tall windows, watching snowflakes drift through the darkness with unusual concentration. When she greeted him, Noah immediately stood and hurried toward her, gently taking her hand before pointing outside. His expression had changed. There was concern in his bright amber eyes. Emily followed him into the garden without asking questions. The cold air wrapped around them, carrying nothing but silence and the distant sound of waves striking the cliffs below the estate. Noah stopped beside an ancient marble fountain that had long since frozen over. He slowly raised one hand toward the sky, then pointed toward the northern balcony where Damien stood alone, staring into the endless night. Emily smiled softly. "He looks like he has been working too hard," she whispered. Noah shook his head. Then he placed one hand over his own heart before pointing toward Damien again. Emily frowned, trying to understand the meaning behind his familiar signs. Before she could ask another question, Damien descended the stone staircase into the garden. His expression remained calm as always, but something about his eyes seemed heavier than before, as though an invisible burden had settled upon him after their accidental encounter the previous afternoon. He approached Noah first, gently resting one hand on the boy's shoulder. Noah looked up at him, then immediately reached for Emily's sleeve, silently pulling both of them closer together. For one unexpected moment, the three of them stood only a few feet apart beneath the falling snow. Emily laughed quietly at Noah's determination. "I think he wants us to take a walk together," she said. Damien almost answered, but Noah had already started leading them along the garden path. The little boy smiled more than Emily had ever seen before, occasionally glancing over his shoulder to make certain they were still following him. For several peaceful minutes, no one spoke. The silence did not feel uncomfortable. It felt strangely natural. Emily eventually broke it by pointing toward a row of frozen rose bushes. "They will bloom again in the spring," she said with quiet confidence. Damien looked toward the sleeping garden. "How can you be so certain?" Emily smiled without looking at him. "Because winter never asks permission before it arrives, and spring never forgets to come back." Her simple answer lingered in the cold air. Damien found himself thinking about those words long after they continued walking. They sounded impossibly ordinary, yet they reached a place inside him that centuries of wisdom never had. Hidden behind the upper balcony, Victoria watched the scene unfold with growing concern. She had expected distance between the Alpha and the young servant. Instead, she saw something far more dangerous. She saw comfort. She quietly opened an old leather journal filled with handwritten records passed down through generations of vampire nobles. Near the center of one faded page rested an illustration almost identical to the silver mark she had witnessed the day before. Beneath it, a single sentence had been carefully underlined many years earlier. When the moon mark awakens, no throne is stronger than the heart it chooses. Victoria slowly closed the journal. She refused to let an ancient prophecy determine the future of Blackthorn Manor. Before the week ended, she would make certain Damien believed the greatest threat to his kingdom was not hidden among his enemies, but standing beside the quiet young woman who still had no idea destiny had already chosen her. The following morning, Blackthorn Manor awoke beneath a sky the color of polished steel. Snow still covered every rooftop, but inside the castle the atmosphere had quietly shifted. Emily noticed it first in the silence. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Servants who normally smiled now lowered their eyes before walking away. Even the kitchen, usually filled with laughter before breakfast, felt strangely tense. She assumed another important gathering of vampire nobles was about to begin and continued preparing Noah's favorite honey biscuits without giving it another thought. She had no idea that before dawn Victoria Ashford had already spent hours inside the council chamber speaking privately with Damien. She presented him with carefully preserved documents bearing ancient family seals, faded maps, and records that appeared impossible to question. According to every page she placed before him, Emily's mother's bloodline had once been connected to an order sworn to deceive vampire rulers by gaining their trust before destroying their kingdoms from within. None of the records were genuine, but centuries of careful forgery made them appear older than memory itself. Damien examined each page without speaking. His instincts argued against every accusation. Every moment he had observed Emily contradicted the story unfolding before him. Yet another voice, one shaped by centuries of betrayal, refused to ignore even the smallest possibility. He still remembered the downfall of his own father, who had trusted someone the royal court warned him never to believe. That mistake had nearly destroyed the Blackthorn bloodline forever. Damien quietly closed the final document and stared through the frost-covered windows toward the eastern gardens where Emily was helping Noah build a small snow lantern from packed snow and evergreen branches. The child laughed without making a sound, his bright smile saying everything his voice never could. Emily applauded his work with genuine excitement, celebrating something so simple that Damien almost forgot the heavy folder resting beneath his hand. Victoria noticed the hesitation in his eyes. She stepped closer and spoke gently. Kindness is the easiest disguise to wear when someone wants access to a king. Damien said nothing. He hated how easily those words attached themselves to old fears he believed had long been buried. Later that afternoon he decided he needed certainty instead of suspicion. Rather than accusing Emily, he quietly arranged a private test that no one else would recognize. Before leaving for an inspection of the southern estate, he intentionally placed the royal moonstone seal inside the eastern library, resting openly upon Noah's reading table. The silver emblem represented generations of Blackthorn rulers and was priceless beyond measure. Every servant knew it belonged only to the Alpha. Hidden behind the partially closed library door, Damien waited in complete silence. Emily entered several minutes later carrying fresh tea and a basket of clean blankets. She immediately noticed the seal reflecting the afternoon sunlight across the wooden table. She paused only long enough to pick it up carefully with both hands. Damien held his breath. Emily smiled to herself and quietly whispered, "Someone must be worried about losing this." Instead of hiding it or calling another servant, she walked directly toward the head steward's office, asking that it be returned to the Alpha before he noticed it was missing. She never asked about its value. She never wondered whether it could change her own life. As Damien watched her disappear down the hallway, certainty briefly overcame every doubt planted inside his mind. Then Victoria appeared beside him once again, carrying another sealed envelope. "There is one more report you should see," she said softly. Damien accepted it without realizing that each answer he sought was leading him one step closer to the greatest mistake of his immortal life. Damien waited until nightfall before opening the final envelope Victoria had placed in his hands. Unlike the ancient records, this report appeared recent. It contained sworn statements from two traveling merchants who claimed they had seen a woman wearing Emily's mother's silver locket meeting with strangers near the northern border years earlier. Another page suggested that descendants of the forgotten lunar order often hid among ordinary human families until they could gain the trust of powerful vampire rulers. None of the claims offered undeniable proof, yet together they formed a story that seemed complete enough to awaken every fear Damien had spent centuries trying to bury. He closed the folder and remained alone in his private study long after the candles had burned low. Through the tall windows he could see snow falling across the courtyard where Emily was finishing her evening chores. She stopped beside one of the younger servants who had accidentally dropped a basket of freshly washed linens into the snow. Instead of criticizing the frightened girl, Emily knelt beside her with a warm smile and quietly helped gather every blanket before brushing away the snow with patient hands. The younger servant laughed with visible relief. Damien watched without realizing he had stepped closer to the window. Everything his eyes witnessed told him Emily was exactly who she appeared to be. Everything inside the report's insisted appearances could be carefully designed. For the first time in centuries, his judgment stood divided between his experience and his instincts. The following afternoon he arranged another opportunity to observe her without revealing his purpose. A message was delivered asking Emily to organize several old books inside the Western Archive, a room rarely visited by anyone outside the royal family. Among the shelves rested a sealed wooden chest containing valuable historical journals and ceremonial jewels waiting to be catalogued before the upcoming Winter Ascension gathering. Emily unlocked the room with the steward's permission and spent hours carefully dusting each shelf, returning every volume to its proper place according to handwritten records older than the United States itself. She worked slowly, stopping several times to repair torn bookbindings with simple linen thread instead of replacing them. When she finally discovered the small chest hidden beneath a table, she assumed it had been overlooked during cleaning. She carried it directly to the steward without opening it even once. Hidden behind a narrow passage built into the stone walls generations earlier, Damien watched everything through a concealed viewing panel. Once again Emily had chosen honesty when no one appeared to be watching. For a brief moment he almost smiled. Then Victoria quietly entered the hidden corridor carrying a folded piece of parchment. "The council received another message this morning," she whispered. "According to our informant, the lunar bloodline waits until complete trust has been earned before revealing its true purpose." Damien accepted the parchment but did not read it immediately. Instead, he continued watching Emily thank the steward before returning to Noah's library with nothing except a stack of storybooks tucked beneath one arm. Noah greeted her with unmistakable joy, immediately taking her hand as though he had been waiting all afternoon. Damien felt an unfamiliar weight settle across his heart. If the reports were wrong, he risked doubting the one person who had brought genuine peace back into Noah's lonely world. If they were right, waiting any longer could endanger everyone under his protection. Standing between suspicion and trust, the Alpha made a decision that would change every life inside Blackthorn Manor before the first snow of winter ever melted. The announcement came 2 days later. Every noble family within the Blackthorn territory gathered inside the Grand Moon Hall for the annual Winter Ascension ceremony, a tradition older than any living nation. Crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors while silver banners bearing the Blackthorn crest hung between towering columns. Emily had never entered the Great Hall before. As one of the junior servants, her responsibility was simple. Refill tea, replace empty trays, and remain unnoticed. She reminded herself of those instructions as she quietly moved through the crowd. Noah sat beside Damien's throne with unusual stillness, his amber eyes searching the room until they finally found Emily. His worried expression immediately caught her attention. She offered him a reassuring smile, hoping it would calm whatever troubled him. Across the hall, Victoria noticed the silent exchange and allowed herself a satisfied smile. Every piece of her plan had fallen into place. Hidden among the official records prepared for the ceremony was one final forged document, carefully placed where the council elders would inevitably discover it. Moments before the ceremony began, an elder approached Damien carrying the sealed parchment with visible concern. The hall gradually fell silent as the elder explained that new evidence connected Emily Carter's family to an ancient order capable of influencing the hearts of powerful vampires through forgotten lunar rituals. Whispered conversations spread across the room like a sudden winter wind. Emily stood frozen, unable to understand why dozens of unfamiliar faces had suddenly turned toward her. Damien accepted the document without changing his expression. His eyes scanned every page in complete silence. Deep inside, every memory of Emily's kindness argued against what he was reading. He remembered her returning the moonstone seal. He remembered her comforting frightened servants. He remembered Noah smiling more in a few weeks than he had in several lonely years. Yet the fear that had haunted Damien since the fall of his father's reign refused to release its grip. If the accusations were true, ignoring them could place every soul under his protection at risk. Emily slowly stepped forward after realizing the entire council was watching her. Her voice remained calm despite the confusion in her eyes. "Your Majesty, I do not understand what is happening." Damien looked at her for what felt like an eternity. The hall became so quiet that even the sound of snow tapping gently against the stained glass windows seemed impossibly loud. Noah suddenly stood from his chair and hurried toward Emily, urgently signing with trembling hands. Emily could not fully understand every gesture, but one message became unmistakably clear. He was trying to warn her. Before she could respond, Victoria quietly addressed the council. "If she is innocent, the ancient moonstone will reveal nothing. If she is not, the truth should no longer remain hidden." Several elders nodded in agreement. A ceremonial silver pedestal was placed at the center of the hall, holding the smooth moonstone that had judged royal oaths for centuries. Damien descended the steps of his throne with measured confidence, though every step felt heavier than the one before it. He stopped only a few feet from Emily. Their eyes met. She saw conflict where certainty usually lived. He saw disappointment beginning to replace trust. Without speaking another word, Damien slowly lifted the moonstone from its pedestal. As Emily instinctively reached forward to steady the ancient stone slipping slightly in his hand, their fingers touched once again. A brilliant silver light burst across both of their wrists before anyone could look away. Gasps echoed throughout the hall. The unmistakable moonmark had revealed itself before the entire royal court, and nothing inside Blackthorn Manor would ever remain the same again. The silver light faded, but the silence it left behind felt even louder. Every elder, every noble, and every servant stared at the glowing moonmarks resting on Damien's wrist and Emily's hand. The ancient symbol could not be forged, purchased, or summoned by ambition. It appeared only when destiny itself recognized two souls. Emily looked down in disbelief, gently touching the delicate pattern as though afraid it might disappear. She had no idea what it meant, but the sorrow spreading across Damien's face frightened her more than the mark itself. Noah rushed toward them, his small hands moving rapidly through familiar signs. His eyes filled with desperate urgency as he tried to tell Damien something only he seemed to understand. Before anyone could interpret his message, Victoria stepped forward with practiced confidence. "The legends warned us this could happen," she said calmly. The lunar bloodline was known for creating false bonds to gain influence over royal families. The mark proves only that the ritual succeeded. Murmurs swept through the hall once again. Several council members exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked at Emily with sympathy. Others looked at her with growing suspicion. Damien remained perfectly still. His instincts shouted that Victoria's explanation made no sense. Every conversation he had shared with Emily, every quiet act of kindness he had witnessed, every smile Noah had offered because of her presence stood against the accusations. Yet the weight of 5 centuries pressed heavily upon his judgment. A single mistake by an alpha could endanger generations. Emily slowly raised her eyes to meet his. There was no anger in them, only confusion and the hope that he would see the truth she could not explain. "I do not know why this happened," she said softly. "But I have never lied to you." Damien closed his eyes for only a heartbeat. When he opened them again, the ruler had overcome the man. He turned toward the council with the calm authority that had guided his kingdom for centuries. "The safety of this territory must remain above every personal desire," he declared. His voice echoed across the marble hall. Emily felt the warmth drain from her face. Noah immediately shook his head, tears gathering in his amber eyes as he stepped between them, desperately signing the same warning again and again. Damien noticed the child's fear, yet he believed he had no choice. He slowly lifted his marked hand for everyone to see. "Until the truth can be proven beyond all doubt," he said, "I cannot accept this bond." The words settled over the hall like falling snow. Emily stood motionless. She had never imagined that silence itself could hurt more than any accusation. She searched Damien's face one last time, hoping to find the man who had quietly watched Noah laugh in the gardens, the man who had listened when she spoke about spring always returning after winter. Instead, she found only the alpha carrying the unbearable weight of his crown. She nodded once, not because she agreed, but because she finally understood that trust could disappear long before love ever had the chance to grow. Without another word, she slowly removed the simple silver servant's badge from her uniform and placed it gently upon the ceremonial pedestal beneath the glowing moonstone. "Then I will not ask you to believe me," she whispered. "Truth does not become stronger because someone powerful accepts it." She turned and walked toward the great doors while every footstep echoed through the silent chamber. Noah reached out toward her, but she offered him one small, reassuring smile before continuing forward. As the massive doors closed behind her, the moon mark upon Damien's wrist pulsed once with a quiet silver light, and for the first time in more than 500 years, the alpha vampire felt that he had not protected his kingdom at all. He had simply watched something priceless walk away. Snow continued falling through the night as Emily walked away from Blackthorn Manor carrying nothing except her canvas bag and the silver locket that had belonged to her mother. She did not look back. Every step away from the castle felt heavier than the last, yet with each mile she also felt something unexpected. The quiet ache inside her heart slowly transformed into an unfamiliar warmth spreading beneath the moon mark on her wrist. By sunrise she reached the small farming community of Willow Creek, where an elderly baker named Margaret Ellis offered her a room above the bakery in exchange for helping before dawn each morning. Emily accepted with quiet gratitude. Days became weeks. The scent of fresh bread replaced the cold marble halls of the manor. Children laughed outside the shop every afternoon, and neighbors greeted one another by name instead of title. Emily discovered that kindness could still grow even after disappointment had taken root. Strangely, anyone who entered the bakery carrying sadness seemed to leave with unexpected peace whenever she served them. She never realized the faint silver glow beneath her sleeve appeared each time she comforted another person. Back at Blackthorn Manor, the silence became impossible to ignore. Noah refused to visit the library. He spent every evening drawing the same picture again and again. A lonely farmhouse beneath falling rain. An alpha kneeling outside its door. Damien found dozens of those drawings scattered across the child's room. At first he believed they reflected grief. Then Noah handed him one final page. Beneath the drawing, the boy carefully wrote 4 simple words. "She was never lying." Damien stared at the sentence until dawn. Something inside him finally broke free from the fear that had ruled his judgment for centuries. He ordered every document concerning Emily's family brought before him once more. This time he examined the ink instead of the words. The seals instead of the signatures. One small inconsistency became another. Dates did not match. Wax carried the wrong family crest. Handwriting shifted between pages that supposedly came from the same historian. By sunset the impossible truth stood before him. Every accusation had been fabricated. Victoria had not manipulated destiny. She had manipulated him. Damien dismissed the council and quietly entered the abandoned Eastern Library where Emily had once spent every afternoon with Noah. Her favorite chair remained beside the fireplace. A single storybook still rested on the table exactly where she had left it. For the first time since becoming Alpha more than 5 centuries earlier, Damien understood that wisdom without trust was only another form of fear. He had protected his crown while abandoning the person who had never asked for it. 3 months later, standing beneath the rain outside Emily's farmhouse, every memory returned with painful clarity. He no longer came as a ruler demanding acceptance or as an alpha claiming destiny. He came as a man carrying the weight of his own failure. Inside the quiet house, Emily rested one hand over the moon mark glowing softly beneath her sleeve. She heard the rain outside and knew he was still waiting. She closed her eyes, not with anger, but with caution earned through heartbreak. Love could return only where trust had been rebuilt. Beyond the porch light, Damien remained kneeling without moving, willing to wait as long as necessary because some promises could not be spoken once and expected to heal the past. They had to be lived every single day. Neither of them noticed the ancient symbol on Emily's wrist changing beneath the silver light of the moon. A second mark slowly appeared beside the first, a sign unseen for 1,000 years. Far away, hidden within forgotten mountain ruins, an old guardian opened his eyes and whispered into the darkness, "The Judge of Kings has awakened." And somewhere beyond the falling snow, destiny quietly prepared the next chapter, proving that even the coldest immortal heart could only be redeemed through humility, truth, and the courage to earn the love it once rejected.